Hi, Chris. Chris has been working with EBF as a research fellow to better understand the sentiment towards biostasis in the US and also in Germany. And the talk will be Sentiment Towards Biostasis. Chris, take it from here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Gillett. I'm going to be presenting some work that I did with Emil at EBF. We've conducted a large comprehensive survey of the general public's awareness of, interest in, and attitudes towards biostasis. This was an online survey completed by a little under 1,500 people recruited via a local community social networking site. And our sample represents US internet users. So it's a little bit younger, a little bit more tech savvy than the general American public. But always with surveys, that caveat applies that it's impossible to eliminate bias. Our goal always is to reduce it and understand the bias we're creating, and to be very thoughtful about all the decisions we make to reduce bias. And certainly, I think we've done a very good job of that here. I'm confident that the results we have reflect reality. So let's get into it. Awareness of cryopreservation. This is an interesting topic because cryopreservation has been out there in the air for a long time. It's been a big part of popular culture. It challenges really basic ideas about the nature of death and the nature of medicine. But how many people have actually heard of this? What do they think about it? Well, now we have some good answers. 77% of people have heard of cryopreservation. Of this group, of our sample, a little over a quarter have actually actively researched the topic. This is a pretty strong indication of interest because people are taking it upon themselves to take that active step to look into it. And this is certainly stronger than just checking a box on a survey. But despite all this awareness, most people have not thought about this topic. A little under half of people say they've never thought about it, never seriously considered it. It seems to me to not fit in the same slot in the brain as do, say, burial or cremation or CPR for that matter. It's not thought of as a part of critical care medicine. It's not thought of as an extension or rather a viable alternative to the other end-of-life options that are out there. We asked people where they've heard of this topic before. The number one was internet articles, then fiction and nonfiction, TV and film, and word of mouth also stood out. Internet articles and nonfiction television. This is reporting by journalists. This tends to focus on the activity of providers, either as a general introduction to the topic, as a sort of curiosity with a light scientific background, or to report on something newsworthy going on with one of their providers, which tends to be lawsuits and that kind of thing. The fiction, television, and film is a science fiction that we're all familiar with. And then word of mouth, I assume, is a sort of distillation of both of these, the public reporting and the science fiction, with also the urban legends, Walt Disney, that kind of thing mixed in. And so this constitutes basically the information space of cryopreservation that's out there in the public eye at the moment. We asked people, we gave them sort of quiz. We asked them the number of providers, the number of cases, and we let them give an answer as their response. And people's performance here was quite poor, as you see. To be fair, it was a pretty challenging quiz, but there was something interesting here, which is that people tended to overestimate the number of providers and underestimate the number of cases. I think that's interesting because you would expect if someone overestimates the number of providers, they would also overestimate the number of cases. But it seems what's happening here is that there's a large chunk of people whose perception of the landscape of cryopreservation as it's practiced commercially today is one where you have a lot of small, presumably new, inexperienced providers who are offering cryopreservation to a small number of people each. And so the institutional longevity and the consolidation that we see in cryopreservation today is not something that's appreciated by the public, it seems. So there's a lot of awareness of this topic. How much interest is there? We tried to measure this a couple of ways. We just asked people, are you interested? A quarter said that they are, and half this group had not considered the topic before. The lightest way that you could express interest in our survey was by agreeing with the statement, I think cryopreservation is an exciting idea, and I plan to research further. A little less than half of people agreed with that. Next, the next strongest one was I would actually like to begin a conversation to talk to your provider about getting coverage. Fewer people agreed with that, but still a pretty impressive fraction of people. And then the strongest indication of interest came when we asked people, well, what do you actually intend to do with yourself when you die? Burial, cremation, cryopreservation, or I haven't decided. And 6% of people said cryopreservation. This is the least common choice. I think burial was the next most common at around 8%. But this is quite impressive. It's certainly more than I would have expected. It's hard to know how seriously to take the 6%. Very few of them had done anything to actually formalize this wish, even something as simple as telling friends and family about this desire. So I think it's sort of now that you mention it, I would like to do that, but it's desire nonetheless, and that's quite interesting. We also asked people what the most important considerations were when choosing between different end-of-life options, and cost was number one, which is consistent with surveys done by like the funeral industry, that kind of thing. With people's attitudes towards biostasis, there was an interesting effect. People's attitudes were much more positive than I would have expected, and than I think that many of you would have expected. One thing we did was we asked people, we gave them a bunch of different attitudes that one might hold towards cryopreservation. And we asked, do you think that most people hold this view? So we asked, do you think that most people think that cryopreservation should be illegal? 14% said yes, I think most people think that. We asked, do you think most people think that this is a scam or a ripoff? 32% of people said yes. But when we actually asked people, should this be illegal? Only 4% said yes. That's much less, I think, than many of us would have guessed. And there's another positive note here, which is that of this group, the 4% that's agreed with that statement, they tended to have not researched this topic before. They're not particularly motivated. Presumably, it's not something they really think about. I think I remember that out of our whole data set, less than 1% had both researched the topic and agreed that it should be illegal. So that's a positive thing. We asked people to choose from a list of reasons why one might not sign up, might not have signed up yet. Number one was, I haven't thought about it. Number two, or maybe number three, was cost. And then way at the end was, I don't trust the provider. So it seems that people generally agree that providers are acting in good faith. But then when we ask people what problems they perceive to exist with cryopreservation today, the providers did come up. There was this concern that the provider may go bankrupt. That was the second most chosen option. Number one was that the practice damages the brain too much. People were able to choose more than one option here. I think this is pretty spot on. I think most of us would agree that the scientific challenge of the crudeness of current techniques, and then the institutional challenges like the risk of bankruptcy are kind of the main areas to focus on. And then included in that, we asked people if the stigma around this topic matters to them, and they said it didn't matter to them. That was one of the least commonly selected. So looking back at this, if we want to put people into 4 buckets, I think it basically goes like this. A quarter of people are just disinclined to the topic. They have personal, philosophical beliefs about death and attitudes towards death that are just incompatible with this practice, and they're not interested in signing up. And that's fine. It's a personal belief or feeling that they have. The good news here is that this group is not hostile. They have a live and let live attitude for the most part. Now, half of people are open to the topic, not closed off. They haven't really thought about it, but they would agree with the statement that it's interesting. Maybe they'll look into it. Now, I would be very interested to see which groups these people tend to go to once you prod them to think more seriously about this topic. That's an area for more research, perhaps. And then 20% of people seem interested. They've researched it. They have attitudes towards death that are compatible with this topic. One of our major findings here was that a person's attitude towards death, whether they want to live longer or not, whether they think death is natural or should not be avoided or not, was very strong in predicting whether someone was interested personally. And then 5% of people seem strongly interested. They say they intend to be cryopreserved. Not only have they researched the topic, but they've found a provider's website, prices, and that kind of thing. Now, again, I don't know how strongly to take this 5%, but if we really could get 5% of people to think very seriously about this topic, maybe take concrete action, that'd be quite something. So to close here, there's a lot more that could be said. Please look to this PDF that we've put together to communicate our findings in more detail. And if you have questions, there's a Q&A feature. You could also send me an email or schedule a time to talk on the phone. You're all very warmly invited to do that. I'd really like to meet all of you. And to close out, I want to thank Emil for his close collaboration on this project. His contributions are very important to having a good result here. And a lot of good things are happening at EBF, as Emil's about to tell you about. So thank you all very much for listening, and I look forward to meeting you. Thanks.
Chris, thank you so much. 2 quick questions. I don't know if you're still there. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, hey, I'm here.
Perfect, Chris. Quick question. So could you first elaborate a bit on sampling? Like, who are these people that make up this data set? What's the demographics? Just a bit of an overview to understand what's the bias in that regard.
Yeah, this is a group of US internet users. So it accurately represents the gender distribution of the United States, but it skews slightly younger than the actual US population. And we also found that the participants are a bit more tech savvy than the average US population. So we would consider it to be a sample of US internet users, which is still valuable. But it's important to keep in mind that people who are tech savvy internet users younger would probably be slightly more interested in this topic than someone who doesn't have those traits.
Perfect. And then second question real quick. Did you ask the respondents if they're aware of funding cryopreservation via life insurance? Because then, of course, it becomes relatively affordable on a monthly basis.
No, I don't think we mentioned that.
Yeah, I don't think
we tended to communicate expense as a monthly cost, framing it as framing cryopreservation as coverage, similar to life insurance. So although we didn't specifically mention life insurance, I think that a similar effect was created in the mind of the respondent.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Chris. Great talk.
Thanks, Emil.